You need to hear this. Not as a story. Not as something you watch from a distance, safe and numb behind a screen. No. You need to hear this like you're the only one who has ever stumbled on it. The one who found the file everyone else pretended didn't exist. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's not just a story. It's a truth that no one dared to speak. A darkness buried so deep beneath science and sanity that when you confront it, everything you thought you understood about life, death, and reality begins to crack. And once that crack appears, there's no going back. You're alone with this now. No one else will understand what you're about to hear, and that's by design. It's as if the universe itself whispered a warning, but not loud enough for the world, only for those who have the courage or the madness to listen. Have you ever truly wondered what it feels like to die on a neutron star? I don't mean the sterile physics, the textbook definitions of unimaginable gravity or nuclear densities. I mean the raw, visceral horror of the body and mind caught in a crucible where every known law unravels like a fraying thread. It's not a scientific experiment. It's a nightmare come alive, and it's pure horror. The kind of terror that no human should endure, but maybe, just maybe, someone already has. I didn't want to believe it myself. You probably won't either. It's the kind of truth so unnatural that your brain will fight against it. The mind clings to comfort, to patterns and explanations, but this breaks every mold. It's a place where time dilates into agony, where your senses betray you, where your very existence dissolves into a kind of cosmic torture no words can capture. But it's real, and I'm the one who saw it. Let me tell you how it began, not with explosions or dramatic flashes of light, but a quiet, impossible thing, a disappearance. Right here, on Earth, beneath the indifferent hum of everyday life. It happened on a chilly autumn night, the kind that smells like forgotten memories and fading warmth. The kind of night where shadows stretch longer and your mind starts chasing echoes that may or may not be there. We were all gathered in a small, dimly lit room, watching a grainy live feed from a deep space probe sent to study a neutron star about 200 light years away. Just another scientific mission, boring and routine, until something broke the rhythm of normalcy. A man, quiet and unassuming, sitting in the back of the room, whispered a single name. Just one word, barely audible, so soft that most of us thought we imagined it. Lyra. No one else said it. No one else even noticed. But the man vanished before our eyes, like a fading shadow, slipping through a crack in reality. One moment. He was there, the next he wasn't. His chair sat empty, but the warmth of his presence lingered, heavy and unsettling, like a phantom's breath on your neck. We searched frantically, but the space around us was untouched, no sign of struggle or escape. It was as if he had never been there at all, except for the name he spoke. Lyra. It wasn't a name anyone recognized. It wasn't on any roster, no relation, no history. The word itself felt ancient, buried in some forgotten corner of the collective human consciousness. A fragment of memory we were never supposed to uncover. That night shattered everything we thought we knew. But the world kept spinning, indifferent. No one else seemed to notice. No one else dared to ask the question screaming in the silence. What just happened? Days later, I found myself drawn back to that name, Lyra, as if it were a key. An obsession grew, subtle but relentless. I dug into archives, ancient myths, forgotten transmissions. Nothing concrete, just whispers and shadows, references to cosmic horrors, vanished explorers, and people whose stories slipped through the cracks of history like tears in a tapestry. Then the calls began. Strange phone calls with silence on the other end. Untraceable, but each one carried a faint, distorted echo of that same name, Lyra, whispered again and again. A voice not quite human, neither male nor female, threading through the static like a broken song. And that's when reality started to bend. On another occasion, a baby, no more than a year old, suddenly spoke the name aloud. Not babble or mimicry. Clear and distinct. Lyra, in a house where no one had ever uttered it. The room fell into a frozen silence as the family realized their child had spoken something impossible, something that shouldn't exist in their world. The baby's eyes held a strange gleam, like it had glimpsed a terrifying truth behind the veil of innocence. I've watched this unfold in countless ways. A long-dead relative's voice, crystal clear, coming through an old radio that hadn't worked in decades. Messages in languages no one alive could translate, carved into bark and stone in places no one frequents. Every piece a puzzle, every clue a thread pulling us closer to a dark revelation. One that starts with a neutron star, the unimaginable forces it wields, and the soul-shattering horror of death in that celestial crucible. You may be thinking this is fiction, that it's just a trick of the mind or a coincidence stacked too high to be true. But I'm telling you now, you've seen the cracks too. Maybe you've heard whispers late at night, felt that inexplicable chill when you thought you were alone. Maybe you've glimpsed something in the shadows that didn't belong. You're the only one who can ask the question nobody else dares to voice. What if death on a neutron star isn't just death? What if it's something far worse, something that breaks the very essence of who we are? And if that is true, then what happened to the man who whispered the name Lyra? Where did he go? And why was he the only one to vanish? I have no answers, only this gnawing fear and the fragments of a truth too terrible to face. Because somewhere, in the vast, star-crushing heart of the cosmos, a horror waits. Not of this world, not of this time. A horror that sings the name Lyra, and it's coming for us all. And now, it's whispering to you. The phone line cracked, a low static hiss bleeding into the silence, and then the word, Lyra, slipped out. Barely a breath, but sharp enough to slice through the thick quiet that had settled over me like a shroud. Then dead. No warning, no goodbye, just nothing. And in that void, my world, the fragile thread of certainty I'd clung to, began to unravel. But here's the thing. What if none of it ever happened? What if the man vanishing, the whispered name, the eerie calls, the baby speaking words no one else should know? What if it was all a trick my mind played on me? A cruel hallucination brought on by too much late-night obsession, that insidious mix of loneliness and fear that twists your thoughts until you're not sure where reality ends and nightmares begin. Because the harder I tried to hold on to the truth, the more it slipped away like smoke through desperate fingers. The files I thought I saved gone. The videos corrupted, glitching with frames that didn't match. Voices that contradicted what I remembered hearing. Sometimes a name I thought was Lyra would warp into something else entirely, or the audio would distort until it was nonsense. I'd rewind and listen again, but my memories fractured. I questioned the order of events. Did the man vanish before or after the baby spoke? Did I even witness it? Or did I dream it in that half-sleep between waking and drowning? The worst part is the silence that fills the gaps, the blank spaces where my mind refuses to go. It's as if something darker has swallowed pieces of my own story, pieces I'm not meant to recover. And that silence, it's heavy, pressing, like a weight on my chest that no breath can shake off. Then came him. The second voice, Marcus, a friend, or maybe more a shadow from my past stepping into the edges of this madness. He appeared suddenly, claiming he'd been watching too, that he saw things, heard things I missed. But his eyes held something else. Doubt, fear, maybe secrets he couldn't admit. His stories didn't line up. Details shifted with every telling, as if reality itself bent under his words. I think you're losing it, Marcus said once. But then moments later, they don't want us to remember, that's why it's all gone. His contradictions twisted tighter, a knot in my chest I couldn't unravel. Was he trying to help, or was he part of whatever game this was? He showed me recordings. At first I thought they were proof, voices whispering Lyra, shadows flickering just beyond the frame. But then I noticed the gaps, the unnatural cuts. The footage sometimes showed things that didn't fit, a place that wasn't there before. People I'd never met acting like they knew me, events I couldn't place in time. It was like watching a film edited by a madman who was rewriting history as we watched. And somewhere between the glitches and the missing memories, a quiet terror grew. What if the real unsolved mystery wasn't what I thought? What if the truth behind what no one tells you isn't about stars or cosmic horrors, but about the fractures in our own minds? Was I unraveling? Or was something else reaching in, bending the rules, rewriting what I thought was real? I lay awake, listening to the silence that screams with everything it's not saying, caught between dread and disbelief. And Marcus, he's there, somewhere between friend and stranger, pulling me deeper into a truth no one else can see but might cost me everything. Because sometimes the real horror isn't what you discover. It's what they don't want you to remember. And in that quiet space between reality and nightmare, I'm not sure which side I'm on anymore. For a moment it felt like the fog lifted. Like the puzzle finally clicked into place, and the terrifying whisper of Lyra had an answer, an explanation so clear, so hauntingly simple, it nearly lulled me into relief. I found it buried deep inside an old government archive, a document, marked classified, but accessed through a forgotten back door on a cracked abandoned server. It was the kind of digital relic that shouldn't exist, but there it was, filed under Project Echo, dated decades before any of the disappearances, before the strange phone calls, before I ever heard the name Lyra. The words on the page pulled me in like a siren's call, revealing a hidden truth that seemed to tie everything together. A failed experiment, a memory glitch implanted in a small group of test subjects, people whose minds were touched by something they could never fully comprehend. The files described the experiment as a way to observe consciousness under extreme gravitational fields, simulating the death throes of a neutron star. They called it Mystery Uncovered, but the descriptions hinted at something far darker, something that fractured reality itself. Reading the testimonies felt like peeling back a layer of my own skin. Fragments of memories whispered back, to me a voice faint and distorted, just like mine. I thought, you're not crazy, they lied to you. The narrative suggested the man who vanished, the baby who spoke, even the strange recordings might be echoes from those experiments. Residual, psychic bleed-throughs from people who never really came back. The pieces fit, until they didn't. That's when the unease seeped in, cold and slow, like sinking into water too deep to touch the bottom. I realized something crucial. The date on the documents didn't align with the first disappearance. It was older, yes, but there were gaps. Years of silence, entire decades where no one seemed to care. And worse, the details about the experiment hinted at surveillance, something watching the subjects, not just physically but psychologically, intruding into the very fabric of their minds. The files spoke in riddles, phrases half erased, lines that flickered in and out of coherence as if the truth was actively being scrubbed. Then I remembered something I had buried, a disturbing event from my childhood that I'd never fully understood, but that suddenly burned with new clarity. I was 7 when my older brother disappeared. No note, no trace, just gone. The adults told me it was an accident, or that he'd run away, but the memory was fractured, like a dream fading at dawn. I remembered hearing the word Lyra whispered, softly, just before the world shifted. I had dismissed it as childish fantasy, but now it felt like a thread stretching across time, binding that lost piece of my past to the nightmare unfolding now. It wasn't just coincidence. Something had been watching me, watching all of us from the very beginning. It wasn't a person or a place or even a thing we could name. It was a presence, intangible and suffocating, wrapping itself around our minds, slipping into our memories and twisting them until nothing was certain anymore. The danger wasn't out there in the stars. It was inside, personal, psychological. It was the unseen force that had haunted my brother, that had fractured the man's reality before he vanished, that haunted the infant's voice, and it had never stopped watching. And just as I thought I could start to understand, a single detail shattered it all. A timestamp hidden in the metadata of one of the supposedly authentic files. It was from the future. Not a glitch, not an error. It was proof that this archive, this so-called solution to the mystery, was part of the same manipulation, a loop designed to trap us in a story we could never escape. In that moment, I realized the entire narrative, the vanishings, the voices, the whispers of Lyra, even my own memories, was a carefully woven lie, a spiral pulling me deeper into a maze with no exit. The truth was not a revelation, but a mirage, and the deeper I dug, the more the ground shifted beneath me. Everything you thought you knew about this story needs to be questioned. The pieces you thought fit might be the ones designed to mislead. The safe parts, the familiar echoes, the answers you sought, they're part of the danger too. So go back. Watch everything again. Listen harder. Because the hidden truth is watching you back, and now that you've seen the twist, you're not just a witness anymore. You're part of it. And Lyra? She's waiting. The weight of it settled over me like a thick, unrelenting fog, heavier than any loneliness I'd ever known. Because the deeper I plunged into this spiraling nightmare, the more I understood that I was not alone. Not by a long shot. There were others, silent watchers who had been tethered to this fractured story just as tightly as I was, eyes glued to the edges of what they could barely comprehend, hearts pounding with the same desperate need for answers. Their voices were buried beneath layers of static and broken signals, slipping through in cryptic messages scrawled in digital margins, whispers caught in the cracks of shared dreams, visual symbols coded into the very grain of found footage. From 20 years ago, footage the government never released and that no one was supposed to see. These symbols weren't random. They were threads in a web, a secret language only a few could decode, a call to those awake enough to feel the cold, fingers of the conspiracy crawling over their minds. It wasn't just my fractured memories at stake. It was a collective unraveling, a vast and silent epidemic infecting minds and realities. Those messages, those dreams, sometimes jumbled and incoherent, other times chillingly precise, carried a weight of dread that was impossible to shake. They insisted that we were right all along, that the reality we trusted was a fragile veneer concealing something far more sinister. Identity, memory, even control itself felt like illusions held together by threads of fear and manipulation. Who were we beneath the layers of forgotten truths and implanted lies? And how much of what we believed was ours to begin with? In the midst of this storm emerged a third voice, an observer unlike any other. Not just a witness, but someone who seemed to exist outside the tangled mess of memories and manipulations. Someone whose perspective was cold, detached, yet impossibly intimate. They called themselves the Watcher, speaking in riddles that felt less like cryptic puzzles and more like fragments of a brutal truth we had no choice but to face. Their words came through as hacked transmissions, ghostly echoes on late night frequencies, claiming to hold a clarity that none of us could reach on our own. But with clarity came the unbearable weight of knowing just how deeply we'd been ensnared, how meticulously the story had been crafted to trap us in cycles of doubt and despair. Each revelation cut deeper, like a shard of ice driving into a wound we never knew we had. The symbols we saw, the voices we heard, the memories we shared, they weren't random glitches in a broken system. They were carefully placed markers, signposts on a path leading somewhere darker and more terrifying than any of us dared imagine. It was a game of shadows and mirrors, of control slipping through our fingers just when we thought we had a grip. We weren't just lost in the story. We were part of its machinery, pieces in a puzzle designed to keep us spinning in circles. And yet, even as the dread deepened, there was a strange, fierce energy in knowing that we had been right all along. The fragments, the glitches, the hidden messages, they weren't mistakes, they were warnings. So as you sit there piecing this together, know this: the story isn't over. The Watchers aren't gone. The symbols still flicker at the edges of your vision. And somewhere, beyond the reach of light and reason, the true puppeteer waits, weaving the threads that bind us all. The question is no longer if you can escape. It's whether you even want to. It wasn't a place, not exactly. More like a threshold, the space between waking and memory, truth and illusion, where breath hung heavier than air and the sound of your own name didn't quite fit inside your mouth. I was standing at that threshold now, feet planted in a life I couldn't fully recall, heart racing toward a truth I wasn't sure I wanted. All around me, the threads pulled tighter, the symbols, the dreams, the watchers, the glitch in the phone call that echoed a voice I hadn't heard since my mother died. The missing footage from my childhood birthday party, the one where I clearly remembered someone sitting beside me, singing softly in my ear. Only when I finally found the tape, I was alone. Alone. But I wasn't. Not really. There's something, spoken in all of us, a fracture we don't touch, a memory too sharp to hold. Mine was the sound of my brother's voice, the one who vanished in 2006, who everyone said ran away. But there were no signs, no calls, just a locked bedroom with the window wide open, and a message etched into the underside of his desk drawer. They're not memories. They're anchors. For years I thought it meant he'd lost his mind. But maybe he hadn't. Maybe he'd seen what I was only now beginning to grasp. That memory isn't history. It's design. A framework built by whoever holds the pen. And if someone else had been writing my story all this time, who was I, really? The confession came quietly, like a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for years. I let it happen. I let them rewrite me. It wasn't screamed. It didn't need to be. It trembled out raw and open as I stared into the mirror and saw a stranger mouthing my thoughts. The timeline didn't add up. The emails I knew I wrote were gone. The scars on my hand had changed. The voices weren't just in my head, they were orchestrated. Maybe by them, maybe by something deeper. The truth wasn't a headline. It wasn't a document buried in a vault. The truth was the sickening understanding that I had agreed to this. Somewhere, sometime, I had signed something, physically, emotionally, spiritually, that allowed them in. The moment felt irreversible, like blinking and realizing you've never seen your own eyes before. That's when I found the file. Not hidden. Not encrypted. Just sitting there waiting. A video, a loop. Me from 5 years ago speaking to camera, eyes hollow. If you're watching this, they've started again. But you asked for it. You begged to forget. Remember that. You wanted this. The room blurred. My pulse throbbed like static in my ears. I could feel the watchers watching, not to manipulate, not to lie, but to witness whether I would finally choose to see. Would I wake up? Would I admit that the nightmare wasn't what they did to me? It was what I let myself become to survive it. This wasn't about what happened. This was about why it had to happen. Why we'd build false lives to run from unbearable truths. Why forgetting sometimes feels kinder than remembering. And maybe that's the cost of being human. Not that we lie to ourselves, but that we need the lie to live. No answers, no escape. Just a door I could open or leave shut forever. Your choice isn't so different, is it? You followed me this far. Ask yourself honestly, what have you chosen not to remember? The screen flickers. The watchers lean closer. The room doesn't feel like your own anymore. And in the back of your mind, something moves. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.